Hey everyone, and welcome back to English Listen and Learn. I'm Ben, and I'm so glad to be here with you again for another deep dive.
And I'm Anna. It's great to be back with you all.
Today we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of English learners really struggle with, and that's that feeling of just being overwhelmed by how much there is to learn.
It really is a lot like looking up at this just massive mountain. The peak is fluency, but the climb can seem really impossible.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easy to get lost along the way. You start to wonder, am I even on the right path here?
Well, that's exactly why we're here today. We're going to give you that roadmap and the tools you need to conquer this challenge.
We're going to break it down. Why does this feeling of overwhelm happen in the first place?
Yeah.
We'll look at some really inspiring people who've dealt with it successfully, and most importantly, we'll give you some practical strategies to manage it all.
We're going to be exploring how setting the right goals for yourself, focusing on the most important parts of English, and choosing the right resources can really make a huge difference.
We're also going to be talking about how to use technology in a smart way, the importance of taking breaks, and the power of finding support from other learners.
By the end of this deep dive, you're going to feel so much more empowered to navigate this huge world of English learning with more confidence and a lot more clarity.
So let's just start right off the bat by acknowledging that feeling of overwhelm. I mean, it's super common, and it's totally understandable.
Think about it for a second. English has over 1.5 billion speakers all around the entire world. The language itself is just massive with its huge vocabulary and complex grammar rules and all those idiomatic expressions. It really is enough to make anyone's head spin.
And then on top of all of that, you've got the problem that we face in modern times,
Yay.
which is just too many resources. There's textbooks and apps, YouTube channels, online courses. It's like a buffet that just exploded.
And having all of these choices can actually stop us from doing anything. We spend hours comparing different resources and trying to pick the best one instead of actually, sitting down and learning.
It's like you're standing in front of this giant library, and it's filled with all of these books written in a language that you barely understand. Where do you even begin?
And then there's the pressure cooker of expectations.
You see these promises everywhere, these fluent in 30 days guarantees, and it just sets us up for failure.
Learning a language is not a sprint. It's definitely a marathon. It takes time and dedication and a lot more patience.
And when we don't meet those unrealistic expectations, it's easy to get discouraged and you start feeling overwhelmed.
We start thinking to ourselves, I must be doing something wrong, or maybe I'm just not good at languages.
But I really want to emphasize that anyone can learn English. It's all about finding the right approach for you and building up a strong foundation.
I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're learning English is they try to do too much at once. They want to conquer the whole mountain in one go.
And that's where that feeling of being overwhelmed really kicks in. It's like trying to drink water from a fire hose.
That's a great analogy. Instead, we have to try to break down this huge goal of fluency into smaller steps, steps that are a lot more manageable.
And this is where that idea of setting clear, achievable goals becomes so important.
And I don't just mean writing down become fluent in your notebook. It's got to be way more specific than that.
What is it that you really want to be able to do with English? Do you want to be able to have conversations with your friends? Do you want to understand movies without subtitles? Do you want to travel to English-speaking countries? What is it?
Once you've figured out what that specific goal is, you can break it down into smaller milestones. This makes the whole process feel less scary, and it gives you a chance to celebrate those small wins along the way.
And those small wins are so important for keeping that momentum going and for staying motivated. They're like stepping stones that lead you right to the top of that mountain.
I love that analogy. They really are. But even when you have those goals, it can still feel like you're lost in the sea of information. There's just so much to learn. Where do you even start?
And that's where something called high-frequency content comes in.
Hmm.
It's a total game changer in the world of language learning.
If you think about it, not every word and every grammar structure is created equal. Some of them are used a lot more than others in everyday conversations.
And lucky for us, linguists have created these lists that are called frequency lists, and they show you the most common words and phrases in any language.
So instead of trying to learn every single word in the dictionary, you can focus on the top 1,000 words, and this will actually unlock a lot of understanding and allow you to start communicating much faster.
It's like you're learning the basic tools that you need
Yeah.
before you try to build a house. You're not going to start with some complicated gadget that you'll hardly ever use. You'll start with, the hammer, the saw, and the nails.
That's a great way to think about it. Mastering this high-frequency content really gives you that solid base, and it makes the whole learning process feel way less overwhelming.
So we've talked about setting those clear goals, and we've talked about focusing on high-frequency content. These are two super powerful tools for tackling information overload.
But there's another really crucial element that we need to add to the mix, and that is a structured learning plan.
A learning plan doesn't have to be this rigid, complicated thing. It's really just a roadmap to help guide your learning and keep you moving in the right direction.
Think of it like you're hiking up that mountain to reach fluency. It's the trail that helps you make sure you're not going to get lost and that you're making good progress.
Your plan could be as simple as just following along with a textbook, signing up for an online course, or even, creating your own curriculum based on what you want to learn.
The key is to have some kind of structure, some sort of framework that breaks down the learning process into those bite-sized chunks and helps you decide what to focus on first.
This structure helps you feel more in control, and that's really important when you're dealing with that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And when we talk about control, another really important strategy for managing information overload is to be mindful of the resources that you're using.
It's tempting to want to try out every single new app, every website, and every textbook that you come across, but it can backfire.
Having too many resources can cause confusion and make it hard to stick with any consistent plan for learning.
Yeah, it's like having way too many cooks in the kitchen. Yeah, everyone's adding their own special ingredients, and then the dish ends up tasting kind of weird.
I like that analogy. Instead, you need to be selective. Choose one or two really good high-quality resources that match your learning style and your goals, and then stick with them.
Do your research,
Hmm.
read some reviews, maybe try out a few free trials, and once you found something that really works for you, you don't give in to that temptation to keep jumping around and trying something new every week.
Consistency is key. When it comes to learning a new language, it's about building a solid foundation and gradually growing your knowledge and skills.
Even with the very best resources, it's easy to fall into this trap of passive learning. We read textbooks, we listen to podcasts, we watch movies, but we don't actually use the language ourselves.
And passive learning can lead to information overload because we're not actively engaging with the language. We're taking it in, but we're not processing it or making it our own.
It's a little like watching somebody else play basketball.
Hmm.
You might understand the rules of the game, but you're not going to get any better unless you get out there on the court and actually start playing.
Exactly. Active learning is all about using the language in a way that's meaningful for you. So that means speaking, writing, and interacting with native speakers.
And there are so many ways to do this. Try shadowing podcasts, try writing journal entries in English, have conversations with language partners, or even just try thinking to yourself in English.
The key is to shift from just passively consuming the language to actively producing it. This is where the real learning happens and where you start to make the language a part of you.
Active learning helps you to personalize the language, so you're shaping it and molding it to fit your needs and your goals.
And when you're actively engaged with the language, it's much less likely that you're going to feel overwhelmed. You're not drowning in information, you're swimming through it, exploring it, and making it a part of your own linguistic world.
I love that analogy, swimming through the language instead of drowning in it. It really captures what it feels like to go from passive learning to active learning.
And that idea of swimming through the language leads us to another important part of managing information overload, and that's using technology in a smart way.
Technology can be such an amazing tool for learning a language, but it can also be a huge source of overwhelm.
There are literally endless apps, websites, and resources out there which can be exciting but also incredibly distracting.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the newness of all the different apps and features, and you end up spending hours just browsing and experimenting instead of actually, learning.
And all those notifications and updates can make you feel like you have to do everything right now, and that can definitely lead to information overload.
So how do we use all of this technology to our advantage without letting it take over our lives? How do we navigate this digital world without getting swept away by the current?
I think the key is to be very intentional about how you're using it. You have to set boundaries for your technology use, choose apps that are going to help you achieve your goals, and then use those apps in a way that's focused and purposeful.
So for example, you might decide, okay, I'm going to spend 30 minutes every day using my language learning apps, but then I'm going to put my phone away and do something else like reading a book or having a conversation with a friend.
And it's important to remember that technology isn't always good. Spending too much time staring at screens can hurt your eyes, give you headaches, and even mess with your sleep.
And being bombarded with information all the time can actually make it harder to focus and remember the things you're trying to learn.
So technology is a valuable tool, but you have to use it in moderation and make sure you're balancing it with other ways of learning and engaging with the world.
Even with the best strategies, sometimes you're still going to feel overwhelmed. It's just a natural part of learning something new.
That's true, and that's okay. The important thing is to learn how to recognize those feelings and to have ways to cope with them.
One of the best things you can do to fight that feeling of overwhelm is to just take breaks regularly.
Our brains need time to absorb information and to make memories. If we try to learn too much at once, we actually end up remembering less.
It's kind of like when you're working out. You have to give your muscles time to rest and recover between sets.
Yeah, and there's a technique called the Pomodoro technique, which can be really helpful for this. You work for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break. And after you've done that 4 times, you take a longer break.
This kind of structured approach helps you to stay focused, prevents you from burning out, and just makes learning more effective overall.
And during those breaks, step away from your computer or your phone and just do something relaxing. Go for a walk, listen to some music, meditate, or even just close your eyes for a few minutes.
Letting your brain recharge will help you to come back to your studies with way more energy and focus.
And one last thing to remember is that you don't have to go through this alone. Learning a language can be really tough, and there are going to be times when you need help and encouragement.
Connecting with other learners can make a world of difference. You can share resources with each other, practice your skills, and motivate each other and celebrate each other's successes.
Absolutely. Find a language learning partner, join an online community, or maybe think about working with a tutor. Having that support system can really help you stay on track and overcome any obstacles you might face.
And don't forget to celebrate all your achievements, no matter how small they might seem. Learning a language is a marathon, not a sprint. So every step forward is a victory.
You're absolutely right. Recognizing and celebrating your progress will keep you motivated and remind you of just how far you've come.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into information overload. We've talked about the reasons it happens, the importance of setting clear goals, focusing on high-frequency content, creating a structured learning plan, being mindful of your resources, engaging in active learning, using technology in a smart way, taking breaks, and finding support.
These are the fundamental pieces of any successful language learning journey, and they'll help you to navigate this massive world of English with confidence and clarity. Welcome back to English Listen and Learn.
Now that we've kind of set the stage for understanding and managing that feeling of information overload, let's switch gears for a bit.
Let's take a look at some real-life examples of people who've not just tackled this challenge, but they've gone on to achieve some pretty incredible things.
Because, sometimes it's really inspiring to see how other people have actually put these strategies into practice in their own lives.
Definitely. Our first example is someone I bet a lot of you have heard of, Louis von Ahn, the co-founder of Duolingo.
Duolingo's really changed the way people learn languages. I mean, it's made it so accessible to literally millions of people around the world.
And what's really interesting is that Louis actually designed Duolingo based on his own struggles with learning languages.
He knew firsthand how overwhelming it could feel to be faced with so much new information all at once.
So he wanted to create a platform that broke down language learning into these smaller, more manageable pieces.
And that's one of the things that makes Duolingo so effective, those short gamified lessons that you can fit into even the busiest schedule.
It takes away that pressure of having to study for hours at a time. And by focusing on one skill at a time, so vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, it keeps learners from getting overwhelmed.
It's like climbing a staircase instead of trying to climb straight up a cliff face.
Exactly. Each step is manageable, and you can actually see the progress that you're making as you move along.
And those little wins, completing those lessons, they really do add up over time.
They create momentum, and they keep you motivated to keep climbing those stairs.
Duolingo is a really great example of how technology can be used to make language learning more accessible and even a little bit more fun.
But it's not just about the technology, it's about understanding how people learn best.
And our next example, Malala Yousafzai, really shows us the importance of having a purpose and being resilient when you're learning a new language.
Malala's story is truly amazing. She was shot by the Taliban for speaking out in favor of education for girls.
And while she was recovering, she had to learn English in a completely new country while also dealing with the trauma of the attack.
It's hard to imagine how challenging that must have been.
And yet she not only learned English, but she became this incredibly powerful voice for her cause, speaking out on a global stage.
What's so inspiring about Malala is that she didn't try to become perfectly fluent right away.
She focused on using English for a very specific reason to continue her fight for education.
And that sense of purpose, that drive to make a difference, it really fueled her learning and helped her to push past any feelings of being overwhelmed.
It's a great reminder that sometimes the best way to learn a language is to have a real reason to use it in your life.
When you're really passionate about something, learning the language becomes less about memorizing grammar rules and more about achieving a goal that's meaningful to you.
It becomes a tool for communication, for making connections, for actually making a difference in the world.
And that passion can be so powerful. It can push you through those moments of doubt and overwhelm and keep you moving forward.
So we've seen how breaking things down into smaller steps and having a clear purpose can really help with that feeling of overwhelm.
Now let's look at someone who's famous for his productivity hacks and his ability to learn languages quickly. Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss is a big fan of the Pareto principle, which is also known as the 80-20 rule.
And that rule basically says that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your effort.
And Tim applies this to language learning by really focusing on the things that will make the biggest difference.
So for example, instead of trying to learn every single word in the dictionary, he focuses on learning the 1,000 most common words in that language.
Which, as we talked about earlier, can actually allow you to understand a lot of everyday conversations.
Exactly. And by focusing on those core words and phrases, he's able to have basic conversations much faster than someone who's trying to learn everything at once.
It's about being smart with your time and energy, choosing to work on the things that are going to give you the most bang for your buck.
And this approach can be so empowering for learners who are feeling overwhelmed.
It shows them that they don't have to learn absolutely everything to be able to communicate and connect with other people.
They can start with the essentials and build up their skills from there.
These three examples, Louis von Ahn, Malala Yousafzai, and Tim Ferriss, they all show us different but equally important parts of what it means to successfully learn a language.
They show us that there's no one right way to do it.
What really matters is finding those strategies that work for you personally and that help you stay motivated on your journey.
And that brings us back to the strategies that we were talking about in the first part of our deep dive.
Setting those clear goals, focusing on the high-frequency content, making a structured learning plan, being careful about the resources that you're using, making sure that you're actively using the language, using technology in a smart way, taking breaks, and finding a support system.
These are all the tools that you're going to need to successfully navigate this massive world of English learning and actually achieve your goals.
But it's not just about the tools, it's also about your mindset.
You have to believe in yourself. You have to embrace the journey, and you have to celebrate every bit of progress that you make.
And it's important to remember that you're not alone. Millions of people all around the world are learning English right now. And there are tons of resources and support systems out there to help you succeed.
So as we get ready to move into the final part of our deep dive, I want you to think about what really resonated with you from these examples.
What strategies do you think you could actually use in your own language learning?
What steps can you take today to start moving closer to your English learning goals?
We'll be right back to help you answer these questions and give you even more practical tips and insights in the last part of our deep dive. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into conquering information overload in English learning.
We've spent some time really digging into what causes that overwhelming feeling, and I think we've gotten some great inspiration from people who not only dealt with it, but really thrived because of it.
And now it's time to pull it all together and give you those practical strategies that you can actually use to make this work for you in your own English learning journey.
It all starts with those clear, achievable goals we talked about.
Think back to what we were discussing. What's the one thing that you really want to be able to do with English?
Don't get caught up in that big picture idea of fluency. That's the mountain peak that we're aiming for, but we need to figure out the steps to actually get there.
Right, it's about breaking it down. So do you want to have conversations with your friends every day? Do you want to watch movies without subtitles? Do you want to write emails for work with confidence? That's where you need to start.
And once you've got that target in mind, remember how important that high-frequency content is.
Yeah, it's like if you're trying to bake a cake. You learn the basic ingredients before you try to make something super fancy.
Exactly. Think about the conversations you've had lately. Did you use words like ephemeral or ubiquitous? Probably not. But words like the, is, have, and, those are the building blocks of any language.
So find a frequency list for English and really focus on those top 1,000 words. You'll be surprised by how much you can actually understand just with those.
You'll be able to start speaking and understanding so much faster.
And to make this even more doable, remember that structured learning plan we talked about.
It doesn't have to be super rigid, but having some kind of outline, whether it's a textbook you're working through, an online course, or even just a weekly schedule you create for yourself, it can really help keep you on track.
Think of it as your map for learning English. It helps you figure out where you're going and how to get there.
Okay, so this next one is really important, especially with all the resources that are out there trying to get your attention limit yourself.
I know it's hard to resist all those new apps and courses, but trust me on this one.
Choose just one or two really good resources that fit your goals and how you learn best, and then stick with them.
Too many cooks in the kitchen can definitely ruin the broth.
And while you're using those resources, keep this in mind. Active learning is always better than passive learning.
Don't just read and listen. Actually use the language. Speak. Right. Make it active.
Yeah, it's like watching someone else play basketball. You can learn all the rules, but you won't actually improve unless you get out there on the court and play yourself.
Exactly. So shadow those podcasts, write in a journal in English, have conversations in your head. Do whatever it takes to actually use the language.
Make the language your own. Don't just let it wash over you.
And speaking of things that can wash over you, technology is a big one. Use it wisely.
Those apps we talked about, Anki, Elsa, Speak, Quizlet, those can be really great tools, but you have to set limits for yourself.
Don't let your language learning turn into endlessly scrolling through apps.
And one of the most important things you can do for your brain and for staying motivated is to take those regular breaks.
It's like working out.
Yeah,
You've got to give your muscles time to rest and recover.
exactly. The Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest. It can make a big difference.
It's not about cramming. It's about giving your brain time to actually absorb what you're learning.
And when you need an extra push, remember how important community is.
Find someone to learn with. Join a group online. Maybe even work with a tutor. Having people to share the journey with can really change everything.
You can celebrate together, you can help each other when things get tough, and you can keep each other going.
And don't forget to celebrate your own wins, no matter how small they might seem.
You got this. Learning a language is a marathon, not a sprint, and every step you take is moving you forward.
Exactly. So acknowledge those wins.
They all add up, and they remind you that you're making progress.
So there you have it. Your toolkit for taking on information overload and reaching that fluency you're after.
And remember, you're not in this alone. There are so many people all over the world learning English right now, and we're all here to help each other.
Think about those inspiring people we talked about. They faced challenges too, but they figured out how to overcome them.
And so can you? Just keep those goals in mind. Use these strategies, and most importantly, believe in yourself.
It's a journey, and there will be bumps along the way, but that view from the top, it's going to be amazing.
So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep celebrating those wins. We'll see you next time. Happy learning.
Thanks for watching. Until next time.